8 months after the first historic summit at which they pledged to work towards a complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, North Korean leader Kim Jong-Un and U.S. President Donald Trump are set to meet on Wednesday in Vietnam's capital city, Hanoi. What can we expect from this second summit? Let's find out in this episode of The Brief. Hello and welcome to The Brief. I'm Jaffar Hasnain. A second summit between the U.S. President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-Un will be held on February 27 and 28 in Hanoi, Vietnam. This summit follows their unprecedented summit, which was held last year in Singapore. However, their first summit ended without substantive agreements on the North's nuclear disarmament, despite the U.S. president's claim. There has been no actual progress on denuclearization. The U.S. and North Korea have yet to even agree on the definition of denuclearization terms. It might be true that North Korea has not launched a missile or tested a nuclear device for more than 14 months, but there is evidence that it is producing nuclear fuel and working on its weapon program. Meanwhile, one of the focal points of the upcoming North Korea-U.S. summit is whether the two leaders will declare an official end to the Korean War. What steps will they map out on both sides? What deals are going to be negotiated? What is the bare minimum that needs to come out of these talks? Could this summit bring the Koreas closer to end-of-war declaration? Let's take a look at this fact report to discuss this further.
The American president and his North Korean counterpart are due to meet in Hanoi, Vietnam, more than 8 months after their landmark first summit in Singapore. In an apparent bid to manage expectations, the U.S. president in recent days has said he's in no rush to achieve denuclearization, seeking instead a continuation of Pyongyang's pause on weapons testing. On the North Korean side, an end to punishing international sanctions, along with a formal declaration that the 1950 to 53 Korean War is over, are likely to be high on the priority list. In June last year, Singapore hosted the first meeting between a sitting U.S. president and a North Korean leader. The historic summit, which came after months of growing tensions marked by nuclear and missile tests, fresh sanctions and threats of total destruction, ended with a vague statement that has failed to produce tangible progress. As Trump has made clear, the U.S. is seeking an assurance from North Korea that it will stop testing its nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles. It also wants Pyongyang to get rid of all its weapons for its mass destruction programs, as well as produce a roadmap and concrete plan of action on how it sets about achieving that goal. The talks in Hanoi follow a thaw in relations between North and South Korea last year, which saw Kim and South Korean President Moon Jae-in meeting 3 times. During those summits, the two leaders agreed to a series of goodwill gestures, vowing to resume economic collaboration when possible and take steps to reduce military threats. Analysts do not anticipate the Hanoi summit to end with a deal that will see North Korea abandon its nuclear weapons, but have urged Washington to be open to taking interim steps for any agreement to be possible.
The summit taking place in Hanoi, Vietnam, between the U.S. President Donald Trump and the North Korean leader Kim Jong-Un is not the first of its kind. Both the leaders had a meeting last year in June 2018 to discuss the things they're going to discuss in this summit. And these topics were a complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, recovering the remains of soldiers, a new relation, U.S. to provide security to North Korea, and joint efforts to build lasting peace. Now, the topics of discussion for this particular summit, which is supposed to take place tomorrow in Hanoi, Vietnam, are pretty much more or less the same as the previous summit. Now, the previous summit was more about words than action. Now, will this summit be more about action than words? Now, we will discuss this further with Eric Sirotkin. He is joining us live from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Eric, pleasure to have you on The Brief. Let me start by asking you, what can we expect from this second summit? Do you think that this particular summit will be different from the one which took place in Singapore?
This is one of the great mysteries of the 21st century as to why we don't have peace in Korea yet. So this summit gives us a real chance and an opportunity because you have people speaking face to face, which is so essential for anything to get done. We do hope that what can come from this is some representation of ending the Korean War after 60 plus years with a peace treaty, ending that temporary armistice agreement that runs the war situation right now in Korea, and beginning to formally have relationship, because it's only from relationship that you have peace. And currently in the United States, we have a domestic climate in which Donald Trump is flailing a little bit and needs a win, if you will. And if he can do what no other president has taken the steps to do before, he loves that kind of attention, it seems to me that we could have some progress. But it turns a lot on the advisors on both sides and what's going on behind the scenes, because I don't anticipate the North Koreans are going to move toward denuclearization further without an end to the Korean War.
Now, focusing on Kim Jong-Un, do you think that he can be trusted?
Well, you know, we spend a lot of time in the U.S. talking about whether Donald Trump and what he says can be trusted. This is a very difficult scenario to try to figure out. I think with the proper verification, and I mean, why does a country like North Korea need nuclear weapons, frankly? It isn't related to their domestic issues. It's although perhaps it gives them an edge to maintain certain control. But in reality, I think that the agreements can be set up in a way where we have an embassy on the ground, that the U.S. has a relationship there, that we work toward the denuclearization of both sides of the Korean Peninsula. And that's going to have to involve bringing in President Moon of South Korea, who's been very supportive of peace. And I think that when we look at the will of the Korean people for peace, then I think we can trust that certain arms will be laid down once we truly can have trust on both sides. And that only comes, frankly, from relationship.
And Eric, just so our viewers understand it in a better way, how much important is it for the world to denuclearize North Korea?
What's most important is certainly to have peace in Korea, a peaceful North, South Korea, China, Japan for the world will have a huge impact on the notion of world peace and stability. I think that to have the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, that is very important. But we're stuck with this chicken and the egg, which came first scenario as to whether we have peace first and a recognition of a country's right to exist, or do we say, lay down your weapons, denuclearize first? And unfortunately, some people like John Bolton, who used to say his North Korea policy, he's the national security advisor to the president, he said his policy in North Korea was called the end of North Korea. And so we don't know quite what's going on in the background, but I could tell you that across the planet, we cannot be moving like Russia and the U.S., moving away from agreements, moving away from denuclearization. So what this can do is maybe jumpstart a little more peace between all the nations in the region and in the world.
Eric, what do you think is the bare minimum that needs to come out of this summit?
I think if we go through a second summit without a recognition of the end of the Korean War, and some type of formal relations, I think it's a huge waste to have done that. Talking is always good. Obviously, the conflicts have reduced since they were shooting insults back and forth a year ago. So I think talking and continuing talk is good. It's interesting it was in Vietnam. It took hundreds of meetings to end the Vietnam War between the U.S. and the Vietnamese. And so I think it's good to talk, but I think Donald Trump is in trouble if he comes back without anything concrete out of this summit. But he's going to get heat from even some of his internal people that you're dealing with a ruthless dictator. And so he's a little stuck. So at a minimum, I think there needs to be some type of embassy or session office on the ground there in Pyongyang, and then sending U.S. representatives to permanently establish relationship there, and the agreement on North Korea to a stepped and verified denuclearization. But without the peace, why would you lay down your weapons? We learned in Iraq and other places, Libya, other things like that, that doesn't always work. And the North Koreans are very schooled on these other recent historical examples.
Eric, the U.S. President Donald Trump has said that he wants to eventually bring home the 28,500 troops stationed in South Korea. Do you think this is something which will come out of this particular meeting with between the U.S. President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-Un?
I don't think that they're going to put on the table the troops there. I mean, there's a reason we haven't had an end to this war. We maintain these almost 30,000 troops in almost 100 bases and posts across the Korean peninsula, South Korea, a country the size of one state, Indiana, in the U.S. even. And so with China there and with the U.S. selling billions of dollars of weapons to South Korea, maintaining this conflict has been in certain people's best interest. And so I don't think that's on the table at this juncture. I don't know why the U.S. would leave without some more concrete promises, frankly, unless the South Koreans see that as a greater threat to instability. But I don't think that the North Koreans will lay down their weapons without some guarantee of peace. And so I don't see the troops leaving for some time. They're renegotiating currently who pays for them, because South Koreans pay a lot of money for U.S. troop presence in their country. And so that's going to get realigned, and budgets and economics and weapons sales, and there's so many complicated issues. This is not a story of good and evil. This is a story of nations stuck in a dispute because of other interests. And so getting those other interests out of the way, that's going to be the challenge.
Eric, stay with me. I would like to show our viewers what the U.S. President Donald Trump had to say about North Korea before leaving for Hanoi.
Thank you.
Things are happening for our country. I'm now, right after this meeting, I leave for Vietnam, where I meet with Chairman Kim, and we talk about something that, frankly, he never spoke to anybody about, but we're speaking aloud, and I think we can have a very good summit. I think we'll have a very tremendous summit. We want denuclearization, and I think he'll have a country that will set a lot of records for speed in terms of an economy. I think the first trip to Singapore was extremely successful. We'll be meeting with Chairman Kim for 2 days, and I think we'll accomplish a lot. We started off with a very good meeting, and I think we'll continue that along. I don't think this will be the last meeting by any chance, but I do think that the relationship is very strong. When we started, as you know, there were a lot of problems. There was the missiles going all over. There were hostages that were being held. There were remains that we wanted to get back. There were many, many things. Now There's no nuclear testing, no missiles going up, and we have a good relationship, very good relationship. Chairman Kim and I have a very good relationship. I wouldn't be surprised to see something work out. I really believe that as an economic power, because of its location in between, I mean, you look on a map and you see Russia, China, and right in the middle of everything is South Korea, but North Korea right smack in the middle. So you have Russia, China, and then South Korea, and this is right in the middle. Tremendous potential for economic well-being long-term, and I think he understands that very well. I think he might understand that better than anybody. So they have a great, great potential as a country, and I think that's what they're looking to do. We'll see.
Welcome back. To those of you joining us now, we have Mr. Eric Sirotkin, who is a lawyer from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Eric, as we saw in this news report that the U.S. President Donald Trump hailed the summit which took place in Singapore between him and the North Korean leader. Now, for the U.S. president, he's okay as long as North Korea is not testing nuclear weapons. But how important is the complete denuclearization of North Korea? Or would you agree with the U.S. President Donald Trump's stance on this particular issue?
I think the first summit was a success because presidents of countries meeting and talking helps diffuse conflict, and building a little bit of rapport is a very positive thing. And I think we undervalue that with two nations that have existed when we've had journalists ignorantly stumbling across the border and being detained, and we had no one on the border to deal with these issues. Having a relationship is a good thing. So the summit was a first step. Now, on the, I think that the president's view on denuclearization is trying to tap down his critics because we don't expect denuclearization to come out of here because the U.S. doesn't want to negotiate sanctions yet. And so without negotiating some sanctions issues that end up hurting people a lot more than governments sometimes, as we saw in often in Iraq over the 90s when more than 1 million children and people died as a result of sanctions. This is a very controversial issue. So if they're not going to negotiate sanctions and they're not going to negotiate nuclearization, total denuclearization, then he's got to kind of amp down expectations. And so I believe that certainly it's in the interest to have a denuclearized Korean peninsula. Nuclear weapons are a crime against humanity. They're illegal technically under international law, really, and the threat of them is illegal under international law, and both sides have been guilty of that. So I think that at this stage, I think he's preparing us to say, well, it's not going to be total denuclearization yet, but he's got to loosen the sanctions. He's got to say, okay, I've got to give something for this. Otherwise, why would the North even talk about it?
Another important point here, over the weekend, the U.S. President Donald Trump gave a far less optimistic prediction of the meeting, saying, we have a terrific relationship and we will see where it goes. Who knows where it goes, but we will see. What do you think the president is trying to imply here?
Boy, that's a crystal ball that I think the media and the world would love to have, because it becomes very difficult to determine what is Donald Trump thinking. We spend every day here in the United States sometimes with his tweets and his comments to understand what he's implying. I think from what I can tell and knowing the people around him, he is probably not going to get a lot from this summit, except maybe more peace. Which, frankly, right now, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, we sell billions of dollars of weapons to plenty of countries that have human rights issues, whether it's to the Saudis or whether to dealing with our full relationship with China and other places. Despite this, we are left with a situation where what happens is the weapons themselves lose a little of their significance if you have peace. So if Donald Trump can come away from the summit with a relationship based on peace, ending the Korean War. I mean, the Korean War, they think, isn't going on, but it's only been a temporary armistice agreement. It's not how you end wars. And now if we had peace, I suspect the road to denuclearization is going to be a lot smoother.
Eric Swatson, thank you very much for talking to us on The Brief.
All right, have a good day.
And now we will continue with the program. Let's take a look at what the foreign leaders had to say about the upcoming summit between the U.S. President Donald Trump and the North Korean leader Kim Jong-Un.
I hope that the leaders of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and the United States agree to concrete steps for sustainable, peaceful, and complete and verifiable denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
Korea, Your Excellency, the floor is yours.
But the reward will be enormous. Peaceful coexistence, where the human rights situation in North Korea will improve, and all of the Korean people will be able to seek prosperous lives without the fear of war.
I expect it to be a turning point that advances the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, new U.S.-North Korea relations, and a peace regime on the Korean Peninsula. The first U.S.-North Korea summit was an achievement, which will be a milestone in world history. The second summit will go one step further.
It is known that China has 2 points on the issue of the peninsula. First, to achieve denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Second, to achieve and protect lasting peace and stability of the peninsula, or even Northeast Asia. We think a necessary way to achieve the 2 goals is that the 2 key parties, DPRK and the U.S., should take concrete measures, fully consider and accommodate reasonable concerns of each other, and meet each other halfway on the basis of mutual respect so as to jointly contribute to achieving the denuclearization, lasting peace, and stability of the peninsula.
Now, before we move on, I want to show you an important report. A former North Korean diplomat said that North Korea might share its nuclear capabilities with other countries if the summit between the U.S. President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-Un fails. Let's take a look at this report, then we will discuss it further with our guest.
A North Korean defector and former diplomat stated that it's critical that Trump gets a firm promise of denuclearization in the upcoming summit.
If the United States is sincerely interested in the denuclearization of North Korea, in the upcoming Vietnam summit, the U.S. must demand Kim Jong-un to make an announcement to get rid of nuclear weapons and facilities first.
The former diplomat warned that North Korea may attempt to sell its nuclear capabilities to a willing buyer if the 2 countries fail to reach an agreement.
Trump has already broken its deal with Iran. North Korea will use Trump's tendency to make threats to threaten the U.S. that it will share its nuclear capability with whomever is willing to buy it.
Washington's ultimate goal for the talks is for Pyongyang to agree to give up its nuclear weapons.
And joining me now from Washington, D.C. is Ms. Soo Kim, who is a former CIA intelligence analyst. So, thank you very much for being with us. Now, let me first ask you, what are your expectations from the second summit between the U.S. President Donald Trump and Kim Jong-Un?
Well, I think we have to reel back to Singapore, which is where everything began. As you recall, the agreement between President Trump and Kim Jong-un produced essentially no agreement. It was a 4-point declaration, the third item of which was the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, not North Korea. So Kim was able to walk away without being bound or obligated to any kind of tacit or implicit agreement. So he went on to expand his nuclear and missile capabilities. Fast forward to today, where we are with Vietnam, between President Trump and Kim Jong-Un. We need to get North Korea to, they're not going to completely denuclearize. But we need to get North Korea to show some gesture for President Trump to paint the summit as a success. So there's been talk about bringing North Korea to the point where North Korea dismantles its Yongbyon nuclear facility. One option also attached to it is allowing inspectors on site to verify the dismantlement. In exchange, the United States would be offering a menu of concessions, and the whole talk of peace has been going on for days now. So that seems to be, within the realm of possibilities, a likely scenario.
When we look at the summit, which took place in Singapore, that summit was more about words than action. Do you think that we could say differently about this summit?
Well, I think that rests within the negotiations between Trump and Kim. As you know, President Trump he's quite an impulsive decision maker. He makes decisions off the cuff. And given that the summit is going to be 2 days, it presents opportunities to engage in sensationalism, and also the pressure of time and the need to come together and put together some kind of agreement that would be painted as a success could pressure Trump into making once again another decision where let's say that he offers up withdrawing U.S. troops from South Korean soil as a concession. Things like that, it seems very, peace enhancing, but it has implications that would affect the alliance, that would also affect U.S. position on negotiating with North Korea with respect to its nuclear weapons program.
Okay, now, so I would like to point out one of the points you made in your earlier answer. You said that North Korea will never fully denuclearize, but primarily the whole idea of holding such summits were to ensure a complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, isn't it?
Yes, yes. So if you recall the progression or degression of our standard for what's acceptable as a good deal when it comes to denuclearization of North Korea, we went from the complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization of North Korea. President Trump and his administration even imposed timelines to say, we will get this done within a year. We will get this done within the end of the administration. To now, it's gone from CVID to FFVD to an arms control agreement, and now it's just become this broad notion of peace. So understanding that the power of nuclear weapons is inherent to North Korea's identity, it is a bargaining chip, it is an intimidation tool against the South Koreans, you have to think about why would Kim Jong-un want to give this away so quickly? And if he had wanted to give it away so quickly, we would have seen a completely different scenario in Singapore, and we might not even be in a position right now where we have a second summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un.
Tomorrow is indeed a very important day, not just for the U.S. and North Korea, but for the entire world. But there's a nightmare scenario heading into the second summit between Trump and Kim. Some experts fear the meeting could result in an ill-considered deal that allows North Korea to get everything it wants.
Right. And, I hate to sound like a pessimist, but I think we've actually reached that point already where we are giving North Korea what it wants. Let's think about what it has given up thus far. Some paltry concessions about, cosmetic gestures to dismantle a nuclear facility, to giving away the U.S. POW remains. And those were added into the Singapore Joint Declaration so that North Korea gives the pretense that it is holding up its end of the deal. But the way that things are playing out is that we are actually playing right into North Korea's trap, where Kim Jong-un, through his foot-dragging techniques, with his false pretenses of giving us hope that perhaps this time, because North Korea has stopped or actually abstained from nuclear and missile testing for a little over a year now, that perhaps this time around he is serious. But if you look at it, there's nothing that he's really given up. If the regime had been serious about denuclearization, it would have willingly and voluntarily agreed to a more concrete agreement with President Trump in Singapore.
So stay with us. I would like to show our viewers the history of relationship between North and South Korea. Over 100 South Korean companies were asked to leave North Korea when tensions escalated between the North and South back in 2016. Now, both countries are looking forward to the upcoming summit between the U.S. President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-Un. Let's take a look at this report to find out more about it.
Choi Dong-jin runs a clothing factory in Vietnam, one he used to run in North Korea. He's hoping for a breakthrough in this week's summit between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump because he wants to go back to the North.
When it comes to manufacturing, there was no place better than Kaesong because we could go in and make things in a day. We could also communicate better with the North Koreans.
Choi was one of over 100 South Korean business owners who had opened up shop in Kaesong. That was a goodwill project from better times between the Koreas. North Koreans worked as cheap labor for businesses from the South, and the North got cash. But after a missile test in 2016, Seoul shut it down in protest. Some of those factories, which made everything from toys to electronics, quickly moved to Vietnam and Cambodia to survive. It's cheaper there, but nothing like North Korea. Now, the businesses say they're struggling.
The deficits are piling up. That's why we want to get into the North as soon as possible to get rid of them.
Choi's been losing money for 2 years straight. He and many others are hoping the upcoming summit will lead to less sanctions on the North and eventually bring the Kaesong complex back to life.
We were excited that relations between the North and South seemed to improve lately, but as time goes by, I feel like it's all false hope.
South Korean conglomerates are even more cautious. Companies like Samsung saw a gold mine in North Korea's cheap labor and untapped resources, but lost out big time when relations between the two countries soured. Since then, Samsung's invested heavily in Vietnam instead. It's opened massive factories there and now accounts for about 23% of the country's total exports. All that makes North Korea a little less tempting, especially in case relations take a turn for the worse again.
Welcome back. To those of you joining us now, we have Ms. Soo Kim, who is a former CIA intelligence analyst with us, and we're discussing the North Korea and the U.S. Summit. Now, so, let me get this from you. Do you think that such summits, which organized between the U.S. President Donald Trump and the North Korean leader, do you think they have helped drastically in improving the relationship between North and South Korea?
Well, that's a very interesting question because South Korean President Moon Jae-in has, since becoming president, has taken upon himself to make North Korea policy his legacy priority or presidential priority. So he's at points where talks between Washington and Pyongyang have stalled. South Korea has played a very critical role in, let's say, greasing the wheels so that talks are back on track and there is some momentum towards peace, towards some kind of agreement between the United States and North Korea. As far as how the negotiations between Washington and Pyongyang have actually helped inter-Korean relations, that's really tough to say because I would say that the progress in inter-Korean rapprochement, economic projects, cultural initiatives, they have actually kind of sped to the point where they have outpaced the development and talks over the North's nuclear program. So in view of the U.S.-South Korea alliance, where U.S. has since the end of the Korean War been a security guarantee for South Korea against potential North Korean threats, the fact that South Korea has decided to, let's say, become more independent and to embrace this inter-Korean approach, in preference over the U.S.-South Korea alliance, it sends a signal that South Korea is in a position where it is reassessing its alliance with the United States, and also that perhaps peace on the Korean Peninsula is much more important than denuclearization of North Korea.
Looking at the summit, which is due to take place tomorrow. Now, many people are pessimistic about it, many people are optimistic about it. If I ask you, what is the bare minimum we should expect from this summit, what it would be?
Well, I think we have seen the bare minimum since the Singapore summit, where North Korea, without really holding up to its end of the agreement, and arguably there was no agreement for North Korea to honor. At the same time, the discussion between the U.S. and North Korea had been from the onset about its nuclear weapons program. So the bare minimum, I think, is we're there right now. We're hoping to see something that the two sides could paint as a success. For North Korea, it would be some sort of concession from the United States that would lead to eventual peace on the Korean Peninsula under North Korean terms. For the United States, it would be, it started off as no nuclear. It started off as complete denuclearization, and then it gradually degressed to arms control. And now President Trump has also said that he's not in any rush to complete a deal. He's also said that he's okay with just no nuclear, no missile testing. And he's also alluded to a third summit. So that indicates that the expectations are quite low, even for this summit, and that he's also trying to manage expectations from himself and also managing expectations by the American people.
And now let me add one more question here very quickly. Are you expecting a third summit anytime soon?
That is very difficult to say, because we have to see what happens, what surfaces from the Vietnam summit. Kim Jong-Un, I believe, is going to stay in Vietnam until March 2nd. So he has an agenda. He's arrived on the 25th yesterday in Hanoi. He's meeting with Vietnamese officials, and there's a chance that he might even tour the Samsung Electronics factory, although that bears implications on sanctions and South Korea's position, Samsung's position when it comes to dealing with a country like North Korea. So that remains to be seen, but it really depends on what happens between President Trump and Kim Jong-un during the two-day summit tomorrow and the day after. And then the next thing that was on the agenda, let's say, was a possible Kim Jong-un visit to South Korea. Initially, they had said the 1st of March to commemorate the Independence Day movement. But, I mean, if Kim Jong-un is going to stay in Vietnam until the 2nd, that is not going to be possible. So now they're thinking mid-March, perhaps April. So there are other contingencies that need to be played. I assume that when the summit wraps up, President Trump will be giving President Moon a debrief of what happened. And the three parties will probably have to discuss the next steps. Even though it is an agreement between the United States and North Korea, South Korea inevitably has a part in it. So I would assume that it's not going to happen, within weeks or so. And things need to sink in. There needs to be time to deliberate and also calibrate, especially from the U.S. perspective, our next approach, especially if we're not going to get a full denuclearization from North Korea.
Soo Kim, live from Washington, thank you very much for taking out the time to talk to us on The Brief. The focus is once again on whether Kim and Trump would be able to deliver a groundbreaking statement during the upcoming summit in Vietnam. With the first summit producing vague promises towards denuclearization, there's pressure on both sides to hammer out something more. Even if the Hanoi summit does not bring an expected outcome, progress on the peninsula's peace treaty is still something to look forward to. What is more important now is that two sides are able to keep dialogue going even after the summit, so that the promises reached are kept, not broken. I'm Jaffar Hasnain, and see you next Thursday.